OrientDB is provided in two forms: Community Edition, released under the Apache 2 license, and Enterprise Edition, which is a commercial extension of the Community Core, providing features and tools specifically useful to larger enterprises. Being a true open source company, we understand the wrong thing to do is limit the Community Edition in critical features. Make no mistake, OrientDB Community Edition is a fully capable database with unrestricted access to our scalable, multi-master replication capabilities. We took great care in selecting only those tools and features that made absolute sense belonging in a commercial product. The additions include a metrics recorder for historical analysis. This is useful for monitoring and tuning your servers to achieve maximum performance. There's a query profiler that will help you identify most of the bottlenecks in your application. Configurable alerts that can be sent via email or by triggering an HTTP request. Hotfix and new release notifications. Centralized online backups, and the ability to subscribe to production support services. All of these features are tied together with an impressive web application for administering your system called Enterprise Workbench. The best way to understand Workbench is with a demonstration. So here's a quick overview of the Enterprise Workbench tool. You can see on my desktop I have three different things. I have OrientDB Community Edition 1.7.9. I have OrientDB Workbench 1.7.4, which I was able to download after I got access to the enterprise version. And then I have an agent, and what this agent does is we install it in the OrientDB Community Edition to give it the enterprise features. We'll go to another screen I have set up, and let's install that plugin. First, we'll grab the agent folder and drop it into the plugins folder of our OrientDB distribution. Next, we'll go to our console, and you can see I'm already in the proper directory to start the server. So we'll start a distributed version of the server, dserver.sh to start up. So the server started up. I'm going to open a new tab in this console, and we're going to start up Workbench. So we'll need to go back to the desktop, to the OrientDB Workbench folder, and to the bin folder, just like we do with OrientDB server. And to start up workbench./start workbench.sh. Workbench is now up and running. We'll go to our other screen with the browser view. We'll create a new tab and go to localhost port 2491. And we'll be greeted with the username and password to log into Enterprise Workbench. We'll use the default admin and sign in. And you can see that we're into the dashboard of Enterprise Workbench. First thing we'll do is we're going to actually join a cluster, seeing as this is a distributed server. The default group name is still in place, which is OrientDB, and the password's the same. This will get us access to the cluster that we've set up with just one server so far. We'll save changes. And after a minute, you'll see that our node has been registered as online. Go back to our view with multiple screens, and we're going to start up distributed versions of OrientDB on each of these two machines to join the cluster. So we're in the correct folder. It's ./dserver.sh. You'll see that we'll get registered in the network, and this cluster will be formed. So we have all three of these going now. You can see that they're being recognized, and they'll be synchronizing the databases between them. And if we go back to our browser view, you'll see that now we have all three nodes registering in Workbench. Now there hasn't been a lot of activity on this database. We'll go to the Studio, which is port 2480, and just create some fake activity for right now. You can see this is an older version of Studio, but it functions much the same way. So we'll just do a few selects. Select from V. And I'm going to do it a number of times so that we register some hits on the server. And we'll go back to Workbench. Now we'll just work down the menu here. I'll expand the menu so we can see what's happening. The first section we have is the server section. We can choose which node we're going to be working with, and it gives you access to logs of activity, which you can see there's not much there, but this is what we just did. You have status updates, we have database management operations, and we can create different graphs and different views to inspect what's happening on this server. We can go to logs and generate different outputs using a variety of parameters, and we can click on the configuration tab and actually update the configuration right here. So we can do that with each node in the cluster. The next section is the cluster section. This gives us a visual representation of our cluster in action. We have 3 nodes working and synchronizing on the Grateful Dead concerts database. Workbench can manage multiple clusters. We only have one set up here, but this gives you a nice representation visually of what's happening. We can drag around, and you can imagine if there was a large cluster, this might be an interesting view. We'll go up to the Query Profiler section, and this is where you can get a lot of information to find bottlenecks in your application. You can choose the server node, you can choose the database if there was more than one, and get some really interesting information out of these tables. The next section is the notifications, which right now just gives you the 3 initial connections to the databases, but you can do sorts and queries on these to make sure that you're getting the information you need. This ties into the next section, which is the events, and here we can actually create events to be notified of different statuses on our server. So for instance, we could make a new event, my new event. We could do a metrics event, so when a certain metric, we'll configure that, and there's all types of different metrics that you can watch. So when we get an update record, we can choose a parameter, submit, and then we can configure what to do when that event occurs. We could execute a function, we could have an HTTP request happen, or we could send an email. And we can configure each of these options and structure our email message or HTTP request, etc. So this gives you a real look from a remote location of what's happening with your server so that you can be immediately notified of any issues, concerns, or performance metrics that you're concerned with. The next section is called charts. Charts won't show us much in this current state because we don't have anything to work with, but again, you can choose your server, you can set up different views based on whatever criteria you choose. You can choose real-time, different styles of data, and the frequency of polling. But without some data to work with, there's not much to see here today. In our settings, we can enable different metrics or disable them. We have mail settings to set up our email sending preferences, should you choose to use those types of notifications. And we also have global settings that will give you some control over when old metrics are purged. There's a whole help section on Workbench as well, should you wish to get more information on this tool. So that's a brief overview. It's very handy for managing your system, and we'll be making consistent improvements to this over the year and into the future.